So I'm at the Central Experimental Farm for my final assignment video essay. I thought this was a beautiful shot to open the video with. It's very apropos of the area. The park itself shows the old historic farm buildings in the background with the more manicured ornamental gardens that they have at the experimental farm. Although there's a lot of maintenance involved with these gardens, they don't have that natural feeling that you do in some of the parkland setting. It is kind of a nice counterpoint to the agricultural fields that are at the farm and the beautiful parkland setting that is on the other side of Island Park Drive. Now, as we continue along the path, we're going to see a little bit more of the maintained flower gardens that have a little bit more of a European influence with their manicured flower beds, and we'll see them on the other side of the hedge. Now, this area here is where they've done some research and maintenance of the flower beds to find sustainable field crops and flower gardens for the visitors to observe not only the natural beauty but the kind of the research that's being taken place at the Central Experimental Farm. Now, this particular flower beds are quite busy with visitors. I'm here quite early in the morning, but most cases the flower beds are teeming with visitors, and it is a beautiful showcase for the experimental farm to showcase their horticultural expertise. Now, one could question the amount of environmental impact and maintenance that's involved in order to sustain these flower beds, but in overall, the flowers are kind of a smaller aspect of the experimental farm, and it's kind of contained to one small section area of the field next to the Island Park Drive. So, even though it may be a high maintenance section of the park, it certainly is, I think, beneficial for the visitors, and certainly draws in the tourists to the experimental farm. And if that is the opportunity to bring people into the farm and have them explore the larger research facilities and the agricultural sector, then I think this is a successful attempt. You can see as we travel through this flower gardens, they've set up to have a little bit of an ornamental theme, and you can actually even see on the path there's a rabbit that was enjoying the setting where it's a lot quieter to be in the morning along these quiet paths. And as we carry along the path and come through the decorative arbor, we see a little closer to Island Park Drive that separates the manicured landscape along the Rideau Canal and the experimental farm. You can see the decorative rose bushes and some of the more mature trees that are planted along the roadway to block more of the noise. So again, here you see some of the ornamental gardens that the Central Experimental Farm has on display. And off in the distance, you can see another decorative gazebo and more of the mature trees that are ring around the experimental farm and draw the visitors in. And this open green field, grassland, is quite popular with the families where they let their kids play, and they come on the weekends for picnics. Now, this gazebo has some decorative plaques, and these decorative plaques are a note to the historical significance of some of the founders of the park and some of the local community groups. Now, if we talk about socially sustainable landscapes, the experimental farm certainly has its fair share of individuals and community groups that have strive to continue the success of this experimental farm. And as we carry along, get closer to the actual older historic farm buildings, you see some of the decorative rose bushes and the experimental farm buildings off in the distance. Now, in previous essays, I touched on the fact that a number of the experimental farm buildings has diminished in number, and there's fewer buildings still around, but the ones that exist are beautiful examples of the early 19th and 20th century architecture. And we'll see some of the farms as we get a little bit closer to the main agricultural sector of the experimental farm. Now, this is the entryway into the farm buildings where individuals can come in and see the animals and the research that's being taken place by the experimental farm. And as we walk along the path and look over into the distance, you see more of the support buildings and the agricultural equipment that the experimental farm has in place to sustain quite a large number of fields in the open terrain that the experimental farm has in this rural property. Again, this is one of the historic architectural gems of the experimental farm, one of the main farm buildings that visitors can come in and observe. And there's a number of other buildings that are research buildings from the Government of Canada and Agricultural Canada. Beautiful examples. And as we'll see in a second here, this is on a Sunday, and it's a beautiful day, and you can see that a lot of people like to enjoy the roads that pass through the experimental farm. Again, some of the support buildings that are required to maintain, as we can see in the distance, the large number of fields. The way the fields are organized, they're organized into a system of grids. The roads are all paved, and the agricultural equipment drives up and down the roads to and from the fields that are organized in this grid pattern. And there's a central road that cuts through the experimental farm that allows visitors to cut through the property and access some of the busier roads. This view here is some of the research crops that are currently undertaken by the Central Experimental Farm. And what we'll see in a shot here is the portion of the park, unfortunately, that may be diminished in size due to the local restraints of the community that is further encroaching on the property, and whether there will still be some of the acreage left over for development seems to be under question. Now, this shot here that's coming up is of one of the main roads that intersects and cuts through the Central Experimental Farm property. You can see it's kind of designed in a tree-lined colonnade, sidewalks on both sides that allow joggers and cyclists to enjoy the rural setting in the middle of the urban environment. This is a beautiful greenhouse that is used by Agriculture Canada to do some research on botanical gardens and tropical plant species. And in most cases it's closed, but the research that's being done in this facility, I'm sure, has a far-reaching impact on some of the greenhouses right across the country. Beautiful example of some of the tropical plant species on display for those lucky enough to get inside. So this shot here is on the other side of Island Park Drive, and it is the more natural wild environment that the Central Experimental Farm has set up, kind of an untamed environment where it blends into the more carefully manicured colonial gardens. Often when I've walked through this area, I find that this particular section is not used too often by visitors, and it may be partly because it's somewhat complicated to walk your way down through. But I also believe, too, it's part of the wild environment that some individuals don't find very appealing. And that's why the flower gardens that we previously observed are much more popular. And that's kind of a shame, because this is the more natural environment along the Rideau Canal and the waterway system. And it takes far less maintenance to sustain this setting. Now, as we come out into the clearing, we are in the large expanse of parkland that borders the Rideau Canal. Certainly a much more high maintenance, sustainable landscape with large open expanses of green grass that require a certain amount of maintenance. The mature trees that have been planted decades ago have seemed to have thrived in this environment. There's lots of natural vegetation that has grown up over a period of time, and some offshoot little streams and ponds that come off from the Rideau Canal. Beautiful place for families to gather and have picnics. I see quite often when I'm through this area, families gathering together for social events in this beautiful parkland setting. This view is from up on the observation hill that has a broader view of the park itself. You can see the extent in the background, the skyscrapers. It's a beautiful little gem in the heart of the city that has found a way to sustain its rural, natural feel, even though that there is a certain amount of upkeep involved with this park. Again, a beautiful view down towards the downtown core. You see Dow's Lake off in the distance. And what they've done right along the Rideau Canal, they've established a bike and a walk-in path, and this continues to rim the entire Rideau Canal. And as we come closer to the close of the video, I wanted to end on a shot of the Rideau Canal looking towards the Dow's Lake to see how close the historic Rideau Canal is associated with the Central Experimental Farm.